Canada Day is celebrated on July 1st because it marks the anniversary of the Confederation of Canada. On July 1st, 1867, the British North American Act, the BNAA, now called the Constitution Act of 1867, came into effect, uniting three separate colonies, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and the province of Canada, which later became Ontario and Quebec, into a single country called the Dominion of Canada. This day is considered Canada's birthday, although technically it marks the beginning of the gradual process by which Canada gained full independence from Britain. Over the decades, other provinces and territories joined the Confederation, and legal independence from the UK evolved, culminating in the patriation of the Constitution in 1982, when Canada gained full control over its constitution. 1867 was when Canada was formed as a self-governing dominion within the British Empire. Originally called Dominion Day, the name was changed to Canada Day in 1982, the same year the Constitution was patriated. Now, Canada Day is a federal statutory holiday marked by parades, fireworks, concerts, and citizenship ceremonies across the country. Here is an overview of the British North American Act, the BNAA, of 1867, covering its origins, content, significance, structure, legal framework, and long term implications. Officially titled An Act for the Union of Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, and the government thereof, and for purposes connected therewithin. Enacted by the Parliament of the United Kingdom on March 29, 1867, and came into effect on July 1st, 1867. It was created to unite several British colonies in North America under a single federal system. It addressed political instability in the province of Canada, economic integration, and the need to coordinate the defense system, especially in the wake of American expansionism. It was inspired by earlier discussions at Charlottetown in 1864 and Quebec in 1864 conferences, and finalized at the London Conference from 1866 to 1867. It was drafted with extensive consultation between colonial leaders and British officials. It formed the Dominion of Canada, originally comprising of Canada West, renamed Ontario, Canada East, renamed Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. It allowed for the future admission of other colonies and territories, which later included Manitoba in 1870, British Columbia in 1871, Prince Edward Island in 1873, as well as the other provinces and territories that now form Canada. It introduced a federal system of government, dividing powers between central, the federal government, authority, as well as the provincial governments. The federal government was designed to be dominant with residual powers assigned to it rather than the provinces. In Section 91, it lists federal responsibilities, including trade, defense, taxation, banking, criminal law, and indigenous affairs, while Section 92 lists provincial responsibilities such as property rights, education, health, and civil law. It introduced the Peace, Order, and Good Government, or POG, clause, giving Parliament authority in areas not explicitly assigned. It also created the Parliament of Canada, consisting of the Sovereign Crown, the Senate, appointed members, and House of Commons, elected representatives. It also established provincial legislatures, which defined jurisdictions. It was recognized by the British monarch as the head of state, represented in Canada by the Governor General. There's also provincial lieutenant governors who represented the crown and at the provincial level. It also reinforced the monarchical parliament model with a responsible executive. It maintained as well a common law system, except Quebec, which preserved its civil law tradition for private matters. It also created a framework for unified court system with provisions for appeals to the Judicial Committee of Privy Council in Britain until 1949. It did not initially create a Canadian Supreme Court, which was established later on in 1875. In Section 133, guaranteed to use the use of English and French in Parliament and Quebec's legislature and courts. It protected the denominational school rights, especially for Roman Catholic and Protestant minorities in both federal and provincial jurisdictions. It also allowed for the federal government to levy customs and excise duties, with provinces receiving grants. It designated to promote economic independence through intercolonial railway development, free international trade, and standardized law. It contained no domestic amendment formula. Changes to the Act required approval by the British Parliament until 1982. Amendments were infrequent and had to be requested by Canada through formal resolutions. Despite creating a self-governing dominion, the Act preserved British sovereignty over constitutional matters. Foreign policy and final judicial appeals remained under British control until full autonomy was achieved in stages, notably through the Statute of Westminster in 1931. The BNAA was renamed the Constitution Act 1867 as part of the Constitution Act of 1982, which patriated the Canadian Constitution. The 1982 Act added domestic amendment formulas and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, permanently severing legislative ties from the UK. The original BNAA remains a fundamental document and the core of Canada's written constitution. Finally, it provided for the legal basis of Canadian nationhood. It served as a model for federal systems elsewhere. It continues to be interpreted by courts and in resolving disputes over judicial boundaries between federal and provincial government. And lastly, it has undergone numerous judicial interpretations, particularly by the Supreme Court of Canada, to address emergent issues not foreseen in 1867. The first country to recognize Canada as an independent nation was the United Kingdom, and this recognition occurred by default through the act of creating Canada itself via the British North American Act of 1867. However, there have, of course, been other foreign non colonial countries that also recognize Canada as a sovereign state. Although Canada was not officially fully independent in 1867, it remained a dominion under British Empire with foreign policy and constitutional amendments still controlled by the UK until the Statute of Westminster in 1931 and ultimately the patriation of the Constitution in 1982. While there is no single definitive diplomatic event that marks the first explicit recognition by foreign countries, historians generally point to a few key milestones. The United States was the first non British country to establish full diplomatic relations with Canada when it accepted a Canadian ambassador, envoy extraordinary, and minister plenipotentiary in 1943. Although Canada and the US had consular relations earlier, this step marked the formal recognition of Canada's distinct sovereignty in international affairs. Recognition was pragmatic given Canada's growth globally and its role during World War II, as well as its contributions to the war efforts and its strategic importance in North America. France, as well, was one of the earliest countries to acknowledge Canada's distinct national identity, largely due to the shared French language and cultural ties in Quebec. France opened diplomatic missions in Canada in the early 20th century and played a symbolic role in acknowledging Canada's international personality, though formal diplomatic relations lagged behind those of the US. There have, of course, been many different reasons as to why Canada was recognized as a country. First and foremost was the strategic allegiance. Particularly during World War II, Canada played a major role as a military and industrial partner. There was, of course, a growing independence movement in the country. Canada gradually asserted control over its foreign affairs, culminated in independently signing treaties such as the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 and joined the League of Nations as a separate member. Then there, of course, was the Statute of Westminster in 1931, which was the key legal turning point for the country. It granted Canada and other dominions full legislative independence, making foreign recognition increasingly relevant and necessary. Finally, it was due to pragmatic diplomacy. As Canada developed independent foreign policy goals, such as trade, defense, and international law, countries adapted by treating it as a sovereign partner. In summary, the first official recognition was by the United Kingdom by creating Canada in 1867. Some of the first foreign recognition de facto was the US through diplomatic exchange in 1943. Canada's expanding autonomy, wartime importance, and participation in global affairs made it necessary and advantageous for other nations to treat Canada as a fully sovereign entity, which explains why Canada was ultimately recognized as a country.